The courtroom at Fort Belvoir was quiet in a way that had nothing to do with silence. Sunlight filtered through narrow windows, catching the polished brass buttons on dozens of uniforms, casting long beams that stretched across the hardwood floor. The scent of oiled wood and pressed wool clung to the air, the only sound the occasional shuffle of boots or the soft rustle of papers. Everyone in the room carried rank, medals, or a roll. Everyone, except for the woman seated in the very back row. She sat with her hands folded neatly over a small, leather-bound notebook. Her blazer was navy, her blouse light gray, collar crisp, but unassuming. Her hair was dark and tied back in a low knot at the base of her neck. No makeup, no jewelry, not even a watch. Her posture was straight, not rigid, as if she had practiced stillness until it became natural. No one knew her name. No one seemed to notice her. But someone did. A Marine captain seated near the side glanced back, perhaps without thinking. His gaze paused a second longer than it should have. Something about her didn't match the role of a clerk or a curious civilian. She was too still, too observant. She wasn't watching the legal proceedings unfold at the front of the room. She was watching the people watching them. Her pen moved across the notebook now and then. Not often, but deliberately. She wrote in block lettering, neat and steady, as if each word mattered. No one sat next to her. The row remained empty, as if space had bent around her to make room for something unseen. A pair of Army paralegals entered late, glanced toward the back, and then chose seats on the opposite side. Unconscious avoidance. They didn't even know they were doing it. From the judge's bench. Colonel Reeves had not yet taken note of her. The colonel's focus was on the legal motions being passed between defense and prosecution. The bailiff had done a visual sweep and stopped for just a moment when his eyes passed over the woman in the back. He moved on, but furrowed his brow slightly before turning forward again. The courtroom was a place of precision. Everyone had orders. Everyone had a role. This woman had no insignia, no badge, no name tag. Yet her presence somehow made others straighten their backs. She didn't look dangerous. She didn't look lost. She looked like someone who had been here before, in a way no one else quite had. The case today wasn't supposed to draw attention. It was military justice doing what it was meant to do. A pilot had made a decision under stress. Command had questions. An inquiry became an investigation. An investigation became a trial. The facts were being examined. The truth was being sorted out. At least, that's what everyone thought. Isabel Hart didn't move much. She kept her eyes forward, occasionally shifting them from one side of the courtroom to the other. She wasn't nervous. She wasn't excited. She was waiting, like someone who had arrived early to a meeting that mattered more than anyone else in the room realized. And when the court finally called her name, the silence that followed didn't feel procedural. It felt like something had been waiting to step out from the shadows, something that had taken 3 years to find its moment. She stood without hesitation. Her chair didn't scrape. Her notebook closed with a soft click. No one spoke, but heads turned. The unremarkable woman in the back row had just changed the air in the room. The courtroom held the kind of silence that came from order, not absence of noise. Colonel Sandra Reeves sat high on the bench, her uniform crisp beneath the black judicial robe that only partially softened her military bearing. It was 0900 sharp. The flag stood behind her, flanked by the United States Army seal and the Joint Command insignia. Before her, the prosecution and defense faced off in tidy rows, briefcases snapped open, documents squared to the edge of the tables. Everything was precise. Everything followed the rules. Lieutenant Evan Brooks rose as instructed, a junior JAG officer with 2 years courtroom experience and the energy of someone trying to prove he belonged. His dress blues were immaculate, creased perfectly, ribbons aligned. His voice carried through the room with clarity. He wasted no time reminding the court that Major Daniel Whitaker had commanded the Overwatch element during Operation Ash Raven, that 5 soldiers had died during that operation, that Whitaker had aborted the extraction, left them behind, and returned to base. His words were sharp, his tone confident. He pointed to a digital display of tactical overlays, overhead imagery from ISR platforms, time-stamped SATCOM logs, radio chatter transcripts. It was a compelling setup, laid out like a puzzle already solved. According to the prosecution, Major Whitaker had clear channels of communication. He had the extraction grid. He had the authority to make the call. And he had made the wrong one. At the defense table, Whitaker sat straight but looked smaller than his frame allowed. He was in his late 40s, close-cropped hair going gray at the edges. His nameplate read, D. Whitaker, USAF. His shoulders were squared, but the weight of the accusation pressed in. A-10 pilots weren't known for being emotional, but his eyes stayed locked forward like someone trying not to look back. 15 years in, 3 tours in Iraq, 2 in Afghanistan, dozens of chaos missions. You don't get through that by flinching. Beside him, his defense counsel, Captain Lila Moore, kept her notes neat, expression unreadable. She didn't object to Brooks's opening remarks. She let the narrative sit. That was her strategy. Let the story hang there long enough for doubt to gather. The audience included a row of senior officers and enlisted observers, some in Class A's, others in OCPs. A few leaned forward slightly when Lieutenant Brooks referenced the call to abort. No one liked a mission gone wrong, especially one involving a quick reaction force, denied at the final moment. But there were looks exchanged. Not all of them said conviction. Some said question. Brooks spoke about the 3-minute window, when comms were still live and the team on the ground was requesting air support. He detailed that Whitaker received the abort code via encrypted burst and acknowledged he didn't challenge it. He didn't push back. And, as a result, Echo Team was left in a contested zone without cover. No one said it outright, but everyone in the room knew the kind of aircraft Whitaker flew. The A-10C Thunderbolt II wasn't made for speed. It was made for loiter time, low-level CAS, and big firepower. He had been flying support that day, orbiting above in a wide racetrack pattern. The claim was simple. He had the firepower. He had the fuel. He didn't use either. Brooks finished his opening with a quiet, practiced pause. Then he nodded and sat. All the formal tension remained. Colonel Reeves made a note on her legal pad. She didn't look at Whitaker yet. Captain Moore stood but didn't begin right away. She allowed the pause to stretch just a second longer than normal, then looked directly at the panel. "We're here to decide whether a combat pilot made a mistake," she said. "Not whether someone died. That's already true. What matters is why. What he knew, when he knew it, and what command told him to do." There were no dramatic objections, no shouting, just the steady tick of minutes passing under fluorescent lights and steady discipline. But underneath it all, something was off. You could feel it in the way a master sergeant 3 rows back adjusted his posture, in the way a junior officer at the far end frowned slightly when hearing the comms log summary. It wasn't that they didn't believe the facts. It was that the facts didn't feel whole. Major Whitaker didn't speak. He kept his eyes on the screen, now blank. He looked like a man waiting to carry something heavier than guilt, like he had once followed orders without question and was only now beginning to wonder if someone had meant for him to fail. The room shifted the moment her name was called. Lieutenant Brooks stood confidently, unaware of the storm he had just invited. The prosecution calls Isabel Hart. His voice was steady, routine. Nothing in his tone suggested this was anything more than another supporting witness. From the back row, the woman who had seemed almost invisible stood with unhurried grace. She didn't fumble with papers. She didn't look surprised. Her blazer hung neat across her shoulders as she walked the aisle, heels soft against the polished floor. A few heads turned. Then more followed. It was subtle, but a pulse of attention had gathered. Even Colonel Reeves blinked once, as if seeing the name in her docket for the first time. Isabel took the stand and raised her right hand without being prompted. The oath was read. She repeated it in a voice barely above a whisper, but perfectly clear. She didn't fidget. She didn't clear her throat. Her presence didn't need volume. "State your name and position for the record," the judge said. Isabel Hart, civilian contractor, intelligence analyst, formerly assigned to the 17th ISR group under a FISRA. Her words were calm, paced, exact. A few in the gallery shifted. That assignment wasn't common knowledge. It wasn't classified, but it wasn't typical civilian detail either. Brooks approached the stand with a set of printed questions. "Ms. Hart, you participated in the intelligence preparation for Operation Ash Raven. Is that correct? I contributed to the satellite reconnaissance review, terrain analysis, and SIGINT cross-correlation." "Yes." "Can you clarify your role?" "I reviewed high-res passes from KH-11 assets and layered that data against HUMINT from forward elements attached to SOCPAC. I flagged terrain vectors with elevation over 2,400 meters and recommended delay for night op insertion due to thermal distortion affecting FLIR targeting. My report included QRF delay risk based on route compression." There was a pause. A Marine colonel near the back lowered his pen. A lieutenant from Air Combat Command leaned forward. Brooks blinked. "You flagged QRF risk." "I submitted a notice to command that the standard 15-minute QRF standby was unlikely to be met due to the altitude band of the insertion corridor. CH-47s operating at max gross weight above 7,500 feet would have degraded climb rate. I recommended alternate LZ options." Brooks tried to recover. "But you're not a flight ops officer, correct?" "I'm rated in terrain modeling with NGA overlays. I don't need flight hours to understand lift curves. My job was to interpret risk." She said it without arrogance, but the room noticed. A few officers exchanged glances. This wasn't standard civilian analyst talk. It wasn't even standard O3 JAG territory. She was threading tactical doctrine like someone who had lived it. Brooks adjusted his stance. "Did you provide this directly to Major Whitaker?" "No. My report was uploaded to SIPRNet under OPORD Annex G. The standard chain routes that to Mission Command, not Flight Lead." "Then how can you speak to what Major Whitaker knew?" I can only state what he should have received and what he didn't." Colonel Reeves looked up. Brooks frowned. "That's speculative." "I disagree. The comms log submitted to this court omits at least one SATburst transmission. The timestamp is visible on the transmission ledger but absent from the decoded message batch. That suggests manual deletion." She said it plainly, almost dispassionately. But in the gallery, a Navy captain's jaw set. "You're suggesting tampering. I'm identifying data inconsistency." Brooks regrouped. "Let's go back. You mentioned SIGINT cross-correlation. What exactly did you find?" "Intercepted chatter on encrypted VHF indicated the presence of non-local insurgent support, likely linked to third-party weapons transfers. That intelligence contradicts the initial threat matrix given to the ground team. It was excluded from the final operational briefing packet." A murmur started. Reeves raised her hand and the courtroom stilled. "Do you have proof of this omission?" "I archived the raw data, along with the SHA 256 checksum used to validate the original file. If it pleases the court, I can provide the storage module." Brooks's expression cracked for the first time. Captain Moore didn't speak. She watched Isabel with the stillness of someone waiting for the tide to shift. Major Whitaker finally looked up. It was brief, but real. His eyes held hers a second longer than most people would notice. Brooks tried again. "Ms. Hart, you're a civilian. Are you claiming to understand field-level decision chains during live extractions?" Isabel looked toward him, not defensive, just direct. "Extractions follow a 5-layer protocol: primary comms, alternate channel, Blue Force tracker sync, SATCOM fallback, emergency beacon. If 3 of those fail, QRF deploys under Protocol 3 Alpha, unless command overrides. There is no justification to abort with live voice comms unless the ground team is declared KIA. That declaration was never issued. A silence stretched. Colonel Reeves didn't blink. Brooks's voice was quieter. How do you know that level of detail? Isabel turned slightly. Her posture didn't change. Because I've operated in environments where every second mattered. Where those 5 layers meant the difference between being extracted and being erased. She didn't elaborate. She didn't need to. From the gallery, the older Marine colonel crossed his arms and leaned forward. His eyes narrowed. He'd heard that tone before. Years ago. Somewhere far from this courtroom. Brooks stepped back. No further questions. Colonel Reeves nodded. Defense may proceed. Captain Moore stood slowly. Her expression was neutral, but she didn't reach for her notes. Ms. Hart, thank you for your testimony so far. One question. If Major Whitaker had received the full intelligence picture, including your flagged risk items, in your expert opinion, would his decision have changed? Isabel didn't look at Whitaker. She looked at the judge. Yes, the abort wouldn't have been issued, not without direct pressure from command. And you're certain he didn't receive that picture? Certain. A quiet unease settled over the room. Moore stepped back. No further questions, Your Honor. Colonel Reeves stared at Isabel for a long moment. You may step down, Ms. Hart. Isabel stood and returned to her seat at the back of the courtroom. This time, no one looked away. It happened so quietly no one at first understood what she had said. Colonel Reeves had just asked Isabel Hart, once again, to project her voice. The court reporter had trouble catching her statements. Her tone was consistent, but her volume never quite rose. She leaned in slightly, hands resting calmly on the witness stand microphone, and spoke 6 words that landed like a detonation in a closed room. Phantom Sierra Actual, Bravo Echo 7. It took a second. Then another. A few officers frowned. One Army major from operations squinted as if trying to recall something buried. The judge lowered her pen. Captain Moore stiffened in place, her eyes narrowing. In the front row, a retired Marine colonel leaned forward slowly, his posture rigid now, eyes locked on Isabel with sudden intensity. Major Whitaker, who had barely moved in the past hour, flinched like he'd been struck. His hands gripped the edge of the defense table. He stared across the room at her, jaw tight. He recognized the call sign. He'd heard it once, buried in encrypted comms headers, attached to files he'd been told to ignore. Files that disappeared the next day. Colonel Reeves's voice was lower this time. Repeat that. Isabel's gaze didn't shift. Phantom Sierra Actual, Bravo Echo 7. Designation assigned to Task Force Ravenlight. Operational window, 2230 Zulu, AO north of Tabriz. Year 3 of prior command. A silence followed that didn't belong to any courtroom. It felt older, deeper, as if the building itself was listening. The Marine colonel in the gallery finally stood. That call sign's been retired. It's not supposed to be spoken aloud. That op was buried by the Inspector General's directive. Who gave you that code? Isabel looked directly at him. You trained me. Quantico. Sear rotation. 2009. I broke my ankle on day 5 and still passed final phase. You told me afterward I wouldn't forget the pain, but I'd remember why it mattered. His mouth opened, but nothing came out. Then finally, he said, Jesus. Hart. Now all heads turned. Major Whitaker exhaled through his nose, as if trying to steady something he'd been holding too long. He whispered her name like it belonged to a ghost. He didn't blink. Colonel Reeves spoke slowly. You're saying you were assigned to Phantom Sierra. I was the field commander. Call sign Ravenlight 6. Embedded with Special Reconnaissance Team Theta. Later absorbed into Echo Shadow. We had joint orders from SOCOM and intelligence support activity. The op was compartmentalized under an SI classification. Most people didn't know it existed. The words were calm, measured. They sounded like doctrine, like briefing material, like a classified file no one was supposed to open. I was listed as KIA when our final comms failed during withdrawal phase. A misfire from an RPG struck the primary relay antenna. Last message sent at 0146 Zulu, requesting QRF from standby unit operating 2 clicks south. That request was never answered. The Marine colonel sat down hard. His face was pale. Colonel Reeves leaned forward, her eyes scanning the woman before her like seeing her for the first time. "Why didn't you come forward before?" "Because I didn't know who to trust. And I didn't survive long enough to give anyone the benefit of the doubt." She reached down beside her and retrieved a waterproof field notebook. Green canvas, zippered edges, torn but intact. She held it up for the court to see. This is the original operations log from Phantom Sierra. It contains serial numbers, hand-drawn topographic overlays, and direct quotes from intercepted transmissions involving arms transfers to non-state actors. This mission wasn't about intelligence disruption. It was about finding proof. She opened the notebook and placed it on the bench. The room stayed silent. No objections came. Even Brooks didn't speak. I was a JTAC qualified mission lead. I flew A-10C close air support before transitioning to ground assignment with ISR liaison duties. I was selected for Phantom Sierra because I could coordinate ground operations and air assets without needing separate command elements. It made the unit leaner and easier to erase. Her last sentence landed quietly, almost as if it weren't meant to be heard, but every word reached the back wall. Major Whitaker's hand covered his mouth. Colonel Reeves didn't look down at her notes. She looked only at Isabel. "I didn't die in that mission," Isabel said, "but something else did. Truth, accountability, trust. I came back for one reason only, to finish what we started." And with that, the room felt different. Not just surprised, changed, like they were all sitting in a version of history they hadn't known existed until now. No one moved when she placed the flash module on the stand. It was matte black, ruggedized, the kind of device meant for hostile environments. Beside it, she laid down a sealed plastic pouch with an evidence chain still intact. The GPS tracker rested in her other hand. Its screen was cracked, but the data logs were stored internally. She pointed to the laminated form now resting on the judge's bench. These were the abort orders used during Operation Ash Raven. According to the record, they were authorized by Colonel Sandra Reeves at 2312 Zulu. Colonel Reeves frowned and reached for the document. Her fingers paused before touching it. She examined the signature, then checked the timestamp again. Her eyes narrowed. She didn't say anything, but the room noticed her change in posture. "Compare the curve on the R," Isabel said. "The forged signature uses a swept tail flourish. Your official signature ends in a block curl." Reeves didn't respond immediately. She turned her chair back slightly and retrieved a legal folder. Inside was a signed memorandum from the same month, bearing her official mark. She placed them side by side. The difference was obvious. A rustle spread through the gallery. Not loud, just uniforms shifting as the weight of the moment set in. Captain Moore leaned forward. Lieutenant Brooks stared straight ahead, blinking like he hadn't processed it yet. These orders were generated from a node located at Langley. I pulled the MAC address from the original log. It was scrubbed from the mission server within 90 seconds. "You accessed classified systems," Brooks asked, but the question was weak. I was the officer in charge of the mission. I had full system-level credentials. What I did afterward was to preserve the truth. She opened the notebook next. Inside were coordinates, call signs, even radio intercept fragments written by hand. Rain had warped the ink on the lower half of one page, but the rest was intact. There were red notations next to key entries, some underlined, some boxed in field markers. A tactical journal, not a summary. I buried this after the exfiltration point was compromised. Spent 3 days evading in low terrain south of the ridgeline. No GPS, no signal, just the logs and the last burst I'd recorded. Reeves finally spoke, voice quieter than before. "You're saying everything since then has been based on false command intent?" "No, I'm saying someone hijacked the chain. I don't know who issued the actual abort, but I know it wasn't you. And it wasn't him." She nodded toward Whitaker. The silence was thicker now, Officers who once looked confident now glanced around as if searching for an anchor. One of the sergeants on courtroom security shifted his weight. Uneasy. "This is bigger than a single mission," Isabel said. "These were forged to protect something. Someone used us to make a failure look clean. I was erased, so no one would ask what went wrong." Major Whitaker stared at the notebook like it had gravity. His hands had curled into fists against his legs. Colonel Reeves looked down again at her name, printed beside a signature she did not write. It didn't feel like a courtroom anymore. It felt like a fault line had split beneath them, and no one was sure how far the cracks would go. Isabel didn't rush. She stood beside the witness stand, eyes forward, voice steady. She spoke not like someone recounting a story, but someone still living inside it. It was Uro 142 Zulu when the perimeter broke. She began. "We were 6 minutes past our planned extraction window. Team Bravo had already started fallback. Echo was split 4 on overwatch, 2 pinned near the dried creek bed. I was forward of the tree line with Sergeant Kellen Moore, our comms operator." She paused, glancing briefly toward the back of the courtroom where a woman sat clutching a folded flag in her lap. Isabel gave the smallest nod, then continued. "Kellen was hit during the second volley, probably from a PKM. Judging by the spread and timing, he was still alive, still transmitting. Our SATCOM burst worked. The signal went out, and we heard the reply." She shifted her weight, voice softening. It was Major Whitaker. Voice ID confirmed by cadence and call sign. He asked for a confirmation code on the abort 3 times. Each time the command net came back with the same one-line directive, red line echo, mission abort, air support rerouted. Whitaker leaned forward slowly. His eyes were glassed over, not in tears, but in the weight of memory. He opened his mouth, then closed it again. I logged the time, 01:46. I asked Kellen to repeat the SATCOM traffic, just to be sure. He was fading, but he said it clearly, 3 times. Whitaker asked for visual on us. He wanted confirmation before disengaging. She opened her notebook again. Inside was a small photo, burned at the edges, but protected in laminate. A satellite overlay with handwritten notes circling the exfil point. I told Kellen to save power, conserve signal, and give me the beacon. I took it and started moving south. We had no uplink, no overwatch, no backup, just a broken SAT phone and one last recorded burst from the air. She turned to the judge. "I heard your voice too, ma'am. Not live. Playback from the abort file. It was synthetic. A digital match stitched from recorded authorization templates. You never gave the order. Someone wanted it to sound like you did." A murmur rose, then fell. Colonel Reeves did not speak. She was staring at the desk in front of her, fingers curled. Isabel's hand dipped into her coat pocket. From it, she pulled a small compass. Scuffed, casing dull with wear. She held it in her palm as she stepped from the stand. "I kept this with me, the entire time. It belonged to Sergeant Moore. He gave it to me on our second rotation. Said it was his good luck charm. I carried it after he died." She walked slowly to the gallery and placed the compass in the lap of the woman holding the flag. "This belonged to your son. He saved me when no one else could." The woman clutched it without speaking. Her hands shook. Back at the front, Whitaker stood. He didn't wait for permission. His voice cracked, low. "I asked for that confirmation. I asked for it twice again after the SAT burst. They said ground was gone. No heat signature. No beacon." He turned to Isabel. "They told me you were already dead." Isabel met his gaze. "They needed you to believe it." The courtroom held its breath. Even the security at the doors had stopped shifting. "It wasn't your fault," she said. "They used both of us." Whitaker sat down slowly. Like the weight of the seat was too much to bear. His face wasn't angry. It was broken open with realization. Every decision he'd lived with had been built on a lie. One of the jury members wiped his eyes with a gloved hand. A JAG officer near the back leaned against the wall like he needed the support. "This wasn't a failed mission," Isabel said. "It was buried on purpose. And the people who buried it hoped no one would crawl back to dig it up." She didn't say anything else. She just returned to her seat in the back, her hands empty now, but the courtroom didn't look at her as a civilian anymore. They looked at her like the truth had finally walked into the room, and it wore a name they'd forgotten. The courtroom lights dimmed in the late afternoon sun, shadows stretching long across the floor. Isabel stood near the gallery where the family sat, a quiet stillness around her that didn't ask for attention but carried it anyway. Her posture remained steady, hands clasped in front of her, the sealed pouch of keepsakes resting on the nearby table. She turned first to the mother of Sergeant Moore. Kellen carried two things on every mission: that compass. And this, she said, reaching into the pouch and producing a small leather-bound notebook. He wrote one line in it every night. Not for war, just for memory. He wanted someone to know what it felt like to be there. She handed the notebook over without fanfare. The mother took it with trembling fingers, lips pressed together. No words passed between them, but something settled in her eyes, a kind of peace trying to form. Then Isabel stepped to the father of Corporal Samir Delgado. He could fix anything. Our drone relay once lost signal in a storm. He opened the housing, rewired it with part of his bootlace, and brought the whole net back online. She placed a small, scratched flashlight into his hand. He kept this on a carabiner clipped to his belt. Said he liked the way the light cut through the dark. Each family received something. A patch. A radio cover. A plastic photo strip folded in wax paper. Isabel didn't explain everything. Just enough for them to see their loved ones not as headlines or reports, but as real, specific lives that mattered. Finally, she stepped back to the center and spoke. They died because they did their job too well. They found a route running weapons through provincial supply chains, illegally authorized, airlifted under diplomatic cover. They passed that intel to me. We marked the cache site. The mission was greenlit. Then someone higher decided that exposure was riskier than justice. She let that truth land. Not loud, not vindictive, just the clean weight of what it meant. Colonel Reeves rose from the bench, her face unreadable at first. Then she picked up a sheet of paper from her folder, stepped down from the bench, and approached Isabel directly. She stood at attention. Commander Isabel Hart, the record now reflects your survival and service. Your rank is reinstated. Your clearance and honors are restored by full authority of this court. Reeves raised her hand and gave a crisp, precise salute. Isabel returned it. The sound of boots shifting followed, one by one. The officers in uniform stood. No orders were given. No signals passed. They rose because it was right. Each salute was silent, but full. A gesture that bridged the gap between what had been buried and what now stood in the light. Major Whitaker moved toward her after the room fell still again. He didn't speak at first. Just looked at her the way someone looks at a star they thought had burned out. She saw the burden in his eyes. Not guilt anymore, but what remained after years of doubt. I never saw it coming, he said quietly. She shook her head. None of us did. He reached out, unsure, then drew back. A beat passed. Then she offered her hand. He took it. It wasn't about forgiveness. It was about something larger. Shared cost. Shared return. And for the first time in 3 years, the courtroom didn't feel like a place for judgment. It felt like a place where names could finally be spoken without fear. The fallen weren't numbers anymore. They were stories, and those stories had found their voice. The courthouse doors opened with a soft pneumatic sigh, and Isabel stepped into the light. The sun was low, casting long shadows across the pavement, tinting the parked government vehicles in gold. Her boots made no sound on the concrete. She didn't look back. A few steps down, a retired Marine colonel waited near the edge of the curb. He wore civilian clothes, but his posture hadn't changed in decades. He gave a quiet nod. You always had a way of finishing what others buried. She gave a half smile. Only took 3 years off grid and a forged obituary. He chuckled once, then stopped. They'll come for you, you know. They already did, she said. The driver from the Inspector General's office stepped out and opened the door. Isabel didn't rush. She shook the colonel's hand, brief and firm, the way warriors say goodbye when they've run out of words. She got into the back seat, The vehicle pulled away. Through the rear window, the courthouse faded behind her. Not like a battlefield, but like a page finally turned. The road ahead stretched clean and quiet. Her voice was low, not meant for anyone else but herself. "They won't bury us again,"